Our first speaker looks very much like a famous director, which I told him last night. It's okay if I share it with them? Well, I already brought it up. James Cameron, everyone. He'll be signing autographs at the end of the presentation, but his real name is Carl Nordgren, the founder and creative director of Creative Populist, co-founder of Minoji, and an adjunct professor in creative entrepreneurship at Duke University. He is a serial entrepreneur at heart, assisting in the launch of 2 pioneer cellular service companies, 2 innovative marketing firms, a software company, a semiconductor company, a college sports magazine publisher, and ran an incubator where he helped launch 5 companies in 14 months. Please welcome him to the stage.
So here we go. Each of us being creatively entrepreneurial. 6 words. So before I do start my talk, I have to share something. I was really impressed with the Tanzanian grandmother's story, and we were sharing grandparents' story. I've discovered that I'm going to be a grandfather here soon, and so we were talking about. She was identifying herself then, Mary was, as the grandmother in the group, and so I said, well, I'm just curious. The people are trying to figure out what they're going to call me as a grandfather. What do they call you as a grandmother? I'm going to tell them. I'm going to tell them. She said, DG. I said, DG? And so she told me the story that DG means Disco Granny. How about that? How about that? I am a creative populist. I'm a creative populist because I believe so enthusiastically in the core principle of creative populism, which is that each of us and all of us need to be cultivating our creatively entrepreneurial qualities. A creative populist means a couple of things when we link those 2 words together. We mean to give us all permission to reimagine what those 2 words mean. We really use those 2 words, creative and entrepreneurship, in a really very limited fashion, considering how generative, how exciting those words are. Most of us, when we contemplate creativity floating out there all by itself, we think it means some sort of artistic expression. And since most of us aren't capable of what we consider to be, anyway, a quality artistic expression, we declare that we are not creative. And most of us, when we see the word entrepreneur floating out there all by itself, we think that's all about starting a business. And since most of us don't have an idea to start a business, most of us declare that we're not entrepreneurial. We just can't afford that. We can't afford such a large portion of our population telling stories to themselves, telling stories to each other about the fact that, based on the premise that they're not creative, they're not entrepreneurial. So I link, and creative populists link, those 2 words together to give us the opportunity to think afresh about what those words can mean. And so here's what creative populism offers as a way to think about what those 2 words mean when linked together. It's not a tight definition. I don't offer in my classes or here tight definitions out of the fear that a definition is something that you'll memorize and stop thinking about it. I really want people to be thinking about this and owning the meaning behind these words. But here's how I contemplate being creatively entrepreneurial from a populist standpoint. And that is that each of us needs to have the quality of being able to generate new ideas. Natasha left. Natasha talked about social capital. Social capital is a wonderful technique to use to generate new ideas, right? In your social capital network, you can import an idea from some aspect, some node in your network. So that's one place to generate ideas, to synthesize, to originate, to cross-pollinate, to merge, to mash. There's many ways that we can generate fresh new ideas, whether these are ideas to solve old problems, whether these are ideas to cultivate emerging opportunities. We all need to have that quality. We all need to be intentionally committed to developing that idea generation quality about ourselves. And then we all need to have the capacity to identify the best of these ideas, and then through our execution of them, nurture them along, build the value, sustainable, healthy growth in our execution, to be effective, and I used to say efficient in our execution, You know, if it's a new concept, it's sometimes tough to be efficient in our execution, so maybe graceful in our execution is another way to think about that. So we all need to have this quality to generate ideas. We all need to have the ability to then nurture them along in a healthy, sustainable fashion. And so sometimes, as we've talked about a couple times here in the day so far, this is an activity and effort and energy that's directed towards big transformative ideas, right? And that's how we tend to usually think about that. And that's important as it can be. But imagine if we are, in fact, embracing a creative populist revolution where each of us and all of us are developing our creatively entrepreneurial talent. Imagine how daily organizational life, if the inches and the minutes of daily organizational life would be informed with a creatively entrepreneurial spirit. Well, we can have 100 victories every day when that occurs. So creative populist is very optimistic about all of this, I should tell you that. Creative populists are determined that we're going to debunk the deceit that we have all engaged in for centuries now, that creativity is the special gift of a privileged few. We believe it is as common as can be, and there's abundant evidence for it. First of all, you don't need to hear my statistics if you will just spend a moment thinking about the time that you've spent with 2-year-old and 3-year-old and 4-year-old children, and you just can watch how they bring their curiosity and their imagination to bear on their exploration of their environments, that you watch them engaged in open-ended play, where they're imagining new worlds, and after they've informed those new worlds with their narrative and with their prototypes, which are what? The sticks and the things that they pick up and cobble together to bring into these new worlds, and how one world unfolds into another. If you've observed that, and everyone here has observed that repeatedly, you have a sense of the universal quality of the human condition. But here are some statistics. Back in the 60s, when NASA was an important part of our cultural scene, they appreciated that their scientists and engineers should be really, really good at a particular sort of creative processing, of creative thinking that they called divergent thinking. I call it divergent discovery. Divergent thinking, divergent discovery is that ability to, when faced with a problem, to generate a multitude of solutions to that problem, and in multiple categories come up with multiple solutions to that problem. That's divergent discovery. And NASA understood that their scientists and their engineers should be really, really good at this. So they developed an assessment tool that they could use to apply to wannabe engineers. Well, some engineers found out about this assessment tool, and they made it age-specific for 5-year-olds, and they applied it to 1,500 5-year-olds. And using the grade scale that NASA had created for this assessment tool, 98% of these 5-year-old kids scored at creative genius. 98%. Now, of course, when they're 23 years old, 3% scored as creative geniuses because they've gone through an educational system where they've been told there's one right answer to every question. I'm the teacher, I've got it, you better learn it. But the creative populist revolution is going to say it doesn't matter that once upon a time we lost that quality. We're going to nurture that now. We're going to nurture that along. So there's one bit of evidence about how being creatively entrepreneurial is core to our human condition. Another was, again, referenced in the Tanzanian discussion, and that is that a new book has come out that identifies that 50%, a full half, of all the jobs in the world are jobs that an individual has created for himself or herself to take on. Jobs like the jobs that we saw here in Tanzania, where somebody sees in their neighborhood a problem that they can define as an opportunity to serve their community by making something better and by earning an income by solving that, by offering the solution. 50% of all the work that's done in the world is done in some fashion like that. Again, indicative of a creatively entrepreneurial population. So that's optimistic. Creative populists are optimistic. Here's another reason to be optimistic, and that is that what the neuroscientists are telling us about the incredible plasticity of our brains. Right? For you 20-year-olds out there, when I was your age, we were told by scientists that our brain is as good as it's ever going to be when we're 20 years old. It's going to deteriorate. Be careful what you eat, drink, or smoke. It might deteriorate faster, but it's going to deteriorate. Well, we know now that that's not true. We know that our brains You know, when our mind calls upon our brain to do some new cognitive function, it's almost like a dog leaning into you when you want to pet him, right? I mean, your brains just sort of tend to want to lean into that request. They're so ready, they're so eager to change based on the mind's direction. So there's another reason to be optimistic. If you practice, if you exercise your creatively entrepreneurial qualities, you can transform your cognitive processing. So there's a creative populist message. We have to do more than just offer a message. We should offer some practical content. So here's some practical content that comes with the creative populist story. We organize our content. It's all nonlinear stuff, right? The minute you get into contemplating how creative ideas work together and fit together, it becomes so very nonlinear. You try to make it linear a little bit so that you can share it with people. And the creative populist content comes in 3 nodes. There's a creatively entrepreneurial attitude. We all have attitudes, right? So that's populist. We all have an attitude. Some of us have maybe a little bit more control over our attitudes than others, but we all have an attitude. There's a creatively entrepreneurial technology. The creatively entrepreneurial attitude is intentionality, and I'm going to spend a few moments talking about that node. The creatively entrepreneurial technology, it's nice to have a technology to extend, to leverage. If it's going to be a populist technology, it has to be available to all of us, easy to use. And that's story. Story is a powerful, powerful technology. And then there's a creatively entrepreneurial science that was referenced earlier, the science of complexity. So let me talk about the creatively entrepreneurial attitude of intentionality. I offer my students, I offer you 4 different behaviors that one could practice intentionally. You know, if you want to apply it to the 30-day plan, there's some content to apply to a 30-day plan. 4 different creatively entrepreneurial behaviors. The first is generosity. I will share with my students, why would you ever expect the marketplace to be more generous with you than you are with the marketplace? Why would you ever expect employees to be more generous with their employer than their employer is with their employees? What's more relevant to my students, because maybe they're not yet running companies or marketing, is another expression of generosity that I think is quite relevant, and that is that, you know, what if when your friend or your associate came to you with that most fragile of all things, a new idea? You know, what if your response was a generous response? What if your response was to, first of all, give them that wonderful gift of your undivided attention and really listen carefully and really take in your friend's idea and listen to where it came from and listen to what your friend's excited about and really get fully informed by the best version of this idea that your friend is sharing with you, right? A new idea is so fragile. It would be so easy to just knock that thing over with the untoward comment. But if instead of doing that, you just absorb what's best about this idea and listen carefully to what's best about this idea as a generous act towards your friend, I would suggest that there's a whole lot of, I've told you this would be practical, a whole lot of really important things occur when you do that. Some of them occur right away. First of all, in that careful, close listening, you're going to absorb another model, right? Another form, another way to think creatively about solving a certain problem. And so much of our idea generation is associative thinking, right? So now I've got another pattern that I'm taking in that I can use later, perhaps for my own work. So there's one good thing that happens. Second good thing that happens is it seems to me that it would follow so closely that if I am indeed listening authentically and carefully to this person's idea, that the comments that I'm going to say first are going to be care-filled comments, right? They're going to be comments that are designed and questions that are going to be designed to help make this idea an even better idea. Well, that's certainly a good thing to have happen as well. Maybe you become known as the person in your organization to go to with really good ideas, right? Where's a better place to be in a company than at that nexus where people want to go to share their ideas? And then maybe the other good thing that comes from your generous response to your friend's creative idea is that a lot more creative ideas get generated in your organization. And creativity being a numbers game, that's maybe a great win. So the creatively entrepreneurial behavior of generosity is one. Creative entrepreneurial behavior of humility. The complexity sciences really need to be respected. And if one of the main concepts that comes out of complexity science is this concept of emergence, that what is happening at the micro level doesn't necessarily predict that which happens at the macro level. We've got a lot of good examples of that. One that I like to think about is that a water molecule isn't wet. A bunch of molecules together, the quality of wetness emerges, right? So if you get this quality of emergence, what you come to understand, if you embrace the idea of humility, is that what I think is probably better than what I know. Because what I know changes the instant that I know it because of emergence, because whatever it is I'm studying, whatever phenomena, whatever form, whatever shape that I'm observing here is on its way to becoming something else. And so let me not lock into needing to know, but let me instead be a little bit more comfortable with the study of and the knowledge and thinking about that which is emerging. So there's a second creatively entrepreneurial behavior that one can intentionally practice in their life, humility. Duke students don't like to hear that one very much. The third is being playful. Being playful. Creativity is a numbers game. The difference between creative geniuses and the rest of us is that they just work a whole lot harder. They just come up with a whole lot more options. Their batting averages aren't necessarily any better. Creativity is a numbers game. So if I bring a playful attitude to my creative processing, I'm not going to be in any hurry to get this over with, right? I'm not going to grab the very first idea and move on. I'm having fun with this. I'm playing with it. It puts me in a different place, right? It makes me a creative deviant. It gives me a whole different perspective on what it is I'm looking at if I look at it with a playful attitude. But again, it will allow me to continue to play at generating more ideas, improving more ideas, and that's a very good thing. The fourth behavior of the four creatively entrepreneurial behaviors used to be, when I first came up with this sort of template of content, was simply be enthusiastic. But a while back I was talking to a group in Atlanta and somebody raised their hand and said, well, be enthusiastic about what? And I thought, well, that's a good question. Like somebody else said, I need to have an answer to that question. And I knew that I wanted to have beauty somewhere in this content template for creative populism. And so the minute that question was asked, I thought, well, yes, that's right. It's being enthusiastic in your pursuit of beauty. And so the way that idea has sort of emerged over time is these digital devices that so many of you have got access to right now. We know that those need to be refreshed, right? We are conscious of needing to refresh our digital devices. We forget so very often how important it is to refresh this device. And I'm pretty confident that one of the most refreshing things any of us can do is to just be present to that which we think, whatever we think, is beautiful. Not examining it, just beholding it. You know, just being present to the sounds of the music, just being present to the loveliness of the image. Just be present. Avoid the temptation to have to analyze it. Just be present. And then spend a moment considering what was it about that event that caused my sense of participating in something beautiful. Was it some familiar pattern? And what was it about the familiarity that I can learn from? Oh, it was a foreign, different pattern altogether. What was it about that I could learn from? So I was going to give you one more process here, but I'm right up against the clock. So my final words on creative populism is the following. We need each and every one of you to be creatively entrepreneurial. You are members of a complex organization. There's nothing that you can do that serves the rest of us better than you developing your creatively entrepreneurial talents. There's nothing the rest of us can do that serves you better than us developing our creatively entrepreneurial talents. We all benefit from each other's commitment to intentionally develop these qualities about yourself, and I welcome you to the Creative Populist Revolution.
Is that cool, Carl?
Yeah, that's